What if? So every harvest and every harvest festival that I know has this one thing in common: that no single field, no lone farmer ever gets called a harvest festival. One person can grow one row of wheat, but harvest? That word in itself describes what happens when many fields ripen at once and many hands turn out together to bring it all in before the weather turns. Lammas, the loaf mass celebration, was never a solitary supper. It was the first bread for the whole village, cut from the grain that stood in dozens of separate, privately tended plots, and then baked and broken in common. Now, I want to hold that image for us this morning as I set next to it a document that most of us in Unitarian Universalism these days rarely read. And for those who do read it, we rarely reread it. And even in that, it is the one document that most forms Unitarian Universalism. And that is the Cambridge Platform of 1648. So what is the platform, and what did it actually say? Right? So the Cambridge Platform was drafted by Congregationalist churches of the Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth colonies to answer a hard and yet practical question. Now that we have crossed the ocean and gathered churches that are free of bishops and free of state-imposed creeds, how exactly do these churches relate to one another? And their answer had two halves. And we tend to remember and honor the first half, though sometimes we state the second half, but we don't really get to honoring it. So the first half, the local congregation is complete in itself. A gathered body of covenanted believers meeting in one place holds the full authority to call its own minister, admit its own members, and govern its own affairs. There's no bishop, there's no presbytery, there's no synod that stands above it with any kind of binding powers. That is the seed of what we call congregational polity, and the reason that Unitarian Universalist congregations today call whatever minister they like, that it discerns is appropriate. They can adopt whatever practices that fits the soul and the people of this place, and answers to no ecclesiastical authority. I think that's why many people convert, because there's not this ecclesiastical authority. This is historically a really radical claim about the dignity and competence of a single gathered community. It's the independence that we quote and stand so firmly on. And then we have to turn the page, because the Cambridge Platform didn't stop there. It goes on at some length to insist that these independent congregations are bound to each other, not by hierarchy or any kind of rule, but by communion. The framers were explicit that churches, though distinct and therefore may not be confounded to one another, are nonetheless expected to seek one another's counsel, to watch over one another, to give and receive help when a sibling congregation is in trouble, and to hold each other accountable to the shared faith that gathered them in the very first place. Independence was never supposed to be an isolation. It was proposed along equally and seriously an expectation of fellowship among churches. Consultation, not command. Covenant, not control, right? But that second part often gets left in the drawer. We do speak about it when we speak of the interconnected web of all existence, but we lean heavily on the greater world of nature, not towards one another in congregations. We love to say we're congregational and nobody tells us what to do, but we are less forthcoming with the rest of our charge that even though we're independent, we are therefore obligated to show up for the other congregations because nothing else would hold us together. For me, this is where Lammas or Lanasada gives us a useful picture. If you think about each congregation as a field, tending its own soil on its own timetable, by the people who know the particular ground better than anyone else could, that's real. You have to know where you are, and it can't be diminished. But a field that never leaves the field feeds only itself. And eventually, a bad season, a blight, a single hard year can wipe it out, and no one else will ever notice. The granary, on the other hand, is the other half of the picture. The place where separate harvests are gathered in common, where the surplus in one field can cover the shortfall in another, where the seeds for the next year's planting are kept safely, rather than trusting one particular barn. Our association, back then the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America, which merged into our now Unitarian Universalist Association, basically has always at its best functioned like the granary. It can't order a congregation's harvest. It was never meant to do that. But it exists so that no single congregation's field is left whole and the only thing you have to live on. We are then, by our own founding documents, both things at once: independent congregations and an interdependent body of them. Not one instead of the other. Not interdependent as a polite fictional layered over real of strong independence, but both held together on purpose, the way it was actually written down in our founding documents. So why does it matter? Really? 1648? Why does it matter, right? I think this matters more today than it might have 20 years ago. As we head into another fall, another election season, another stretch of public life that keeps testing whether people who differ from each other can still be bound to anything at all. It would be easy for congregations to retreat entirely to themselves, to say our building, our budget, our own hard year is enough to tend to. Let every other congregation handle its own stuff. The Cambridge platform and the harvest festivals would argue otherwise. A congregation struggling to keep its lights on, a congregation navigating conflict, a small fellowship in a state where the political weather has turned hard against the very people it's trying to welcome, that's not someone else's field. It's ours. They're part of the same granary the rest of us are drawing from and depositing into, whether or not we notice it. Interdependence was never meant to be the value we reach for only when independence has failed us. So I would propose that this Lammas, alongside gratitude for all the things that have ripened in our own congregation over this last year, and we're looking forward to in this next, I'd ask us to turn the page, to read and reread the half that we often skim over. Our independence is real, and I'm not asking you to give that up, but it was granted to us in the same breath that the obligation to the wider body of churches to consult, to help, to be of help, to keep good faith with congregations maybe that we'll never set foot in. It's not an addendum to who we are. So how do we make that concrete? Because interdependence can stay a lovely idea forever if we never actually put it on the calendar. I charge you with finding out what other UU congregations in our area are doing and where they're going. You may not ever hear this from another minister, but attend their services. Heck, we can decide as a whole community not to join up here at all one day and go to somebody else's service. I'll go with you. Right? Go to their forums and their fundraisers and their dinners, their harvest suppers, and share our events with them in return. Not as advertising, right? But as invitation to community, that we have a shared community and commitment, because it's never been a competition for membership and attention, but a collaboration among fields that all belong to the same granary. I know a lot of you hear me talk about, I went to this minister's thing, I went to this other minister's things, I go up to Philly and I'm with 15 ministers once a month from the area. But it shouldn't just fall to your minister. We shouldn't be the only one crossing borders. That conversation needs to be across congregations by every member. Also, look to the UUA itself. There is a steady stream of programming, of worship, online learning that's open to anyone in the congregation. Some of it has a paywall, minimal. None of it is inaccessible because all you have to say is, I don't have the finances, either to me or to the UUA itself, and it's totally lifted. If you're not sure where or how to find these things out, I would open a conversation with me, with any other of our board members and leaders in this faith that are in this congregation, and we'll set you in the right direction. But what I'm not going to do, I put a fair amount in the newsletter. I'm not going to list everything in the newsletter. It's up to you to build our community outside these walls. So go, beloveds, and share in the harvest and return to this community to share the bounty that you experienced there. It will help us grow as individuals, as a community. May our harvest be shared as generously as it is grown. May it be so.